So we just got a new Switch 2 upgrade. One Piece Pirate Warriors 4 has just received a big Switch 2 patch, and honestly, I did not expect to be talking about this game in 2025 because this thing's been on the Switch forever. Performance though was what I would call decent, but it had room for improvement. And I really enjoyed this game first time around, so yeah, I've actually been waiting on this upgrade. So today, we're going to be putting the Switch 1 and Switch 2 versions side by side, checking frame rate, visuals, load times, just all that good stuff. And this update then, it also brings a few new general options that I think fans on either system will potentially want to take note of. So is this upgrade a real win, or just a quick patch pretending to be something bigger? Let's find out. Alright, if this video helps you out today, do me a favor, hit subscribe. It helps out the channel a huge amount. Now, first up, pricing, and this is the beauty of the upgrade. It's free if you already own the game. Bandai Namco have actually done us a solid, even if it did have me going in a bit skeptical about its quality, which it's kind of sad really, honestly. I've already become used to being charged for upgrades this early into the system's life cycle. But yes, head to the eShop, find the Switch 2 version, and under purchase, you're going to see the option to download it for free. Great stuff, no question about that. Just be warned though, the file size is now a beast. On Switch 1, it's 13.5 gig. Yeah, not so bad. On Switch 2, pray for your SD cards, it jumps to nearly 51 gig. Very quickly then, what actually is One Piece Pirate Warriors 4? Well, it's the latest entry in Omega Force's long-running Warriors spin-off series, mixing the One Piece story with huge crowd control, combat, screen-filling abilities, and that classic wipe out thousands of enemies with one button energy. If you played Hyrule Warriors, same thing. Now this game though, originally launched back in 2020, and this Switch version includes a huge roster, multiple arcs, and a mix of story missions and giant boss fights. And look, if you've played any Warriors game before, you'll know exactly what to expect. Fast, chaotic, satisfying combat, where the goal is basically to become a walking hurricane. And if you are a One Piece fan, this one goes big on fan service, special moves, and exaggerated set pieces. Anyway, look, this isn't a full review. Plenty of those out there for you to check out. Let's get to the good stuff, starting with visuals. So I've got to be honest, when I first loaded up the game, the menus didn't exactly have me jumping for joy. Visually, they look almost the same at a glance. The Switch 2 version is cleaner, sure, and the water has a slightly nicer look to it, but nothing that really screams massive upgrade. But once you actually get into the gameplay, it becomes clear pretty quickly that this Switch 2 build is doing quite a bit more. Now, I wouldn't call it a night and day difference, but it is a big enough jump that you feel it immediately. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is clarity. Everything is sharper. Character outlines, clothing, the ground textures, buildings, you name it. On Switch 1, a lot of it has that soft, slightly muddy look. On Switch 2, it just all pops into focus. Cutscenes especially benefit from this. The characters just look more refined and the environments finally have the detail they were meant to have. And of course then, that resolution bump, it's just, we're seeing it in every game. It makes such a big difference. Then there's the world itself. The Switch 2 version is simply more populated, more grass, more clutter, full of environments. The foliage is now everywhere. It feels like they've lifted the lid on just how much they can show at once. You know, pop-in still exists because this is still very much the same game, but it's nowhere near as noticeable. You know, on Switch 1, whole patches of ground detail would appear just a few steps in front of you. On Switch 2, it's pushed much further back and it blends in far better. Enemy density then also sees a boost, meaning way more enemies. Also on Switch 1, they had to cheat it. Big groups would animate like stop motion figures in the distance just to keep the game running. They reduced those frames. That behavior, it still exists on Switch 2, there's no doubt about it, but it takes way more enemies before you see it. And most of the time, the crowd just feels properly alive rather than, stuttering, I guess, in place. And then effects. This is surprisingly one of the biggest visual upgrades. Impact sparks, smoke, ability effects, explosions. Everything just looks fuller and cleaner. It adds way more punch to the combat, and honestly, it gives the whole game a bit more energy. Now, not everything, however, is perfect. Aliasing is still very noticeable. Those jagged, shimmering edges still very much here, even at this higher resolution. In fact, you may spot it easier. And I even ran into a weird glitch in one mission. I'm fighting the smoker where the ground briefly turned into a big black void. I'm assuming that's not intentional and probably will require a patch. But overall, look, this is a clear visual improvement. It is still the same game underneath, same assets, same style, but the Switch 2 version finally feels like it's running without all of the restraints pulling it back. Cleaner presentation, fuller environments, and noticeably more happening on screen at once. Alright, so let's talk performance, because I think this is the real game changer. On Switch 1, the game was always demanding. It still is. I ran a frame rate test across the opening couple of locations. That's what I had access to because I don't have a 5-year-old save file anymore. But the results line up almost exactly with what I saw at launch. So the game on Switch 1 is unlocked, but it never reaches 60. Instead, you're looking at a range, so around 50 FPS in calmer moments, dipping all the way to 30 when the action just ramps up. The good news though on Switch 1 is at least it's consistent. It spends a lot of time hovering around the low 40s, and honestly, for a Switch 1 version of a Warriors game, I think it is very playable. I actually came away impressed back in the day with how stable it felt, and all things considered, that's still, very much the case. On Switch 2, now this is where the upgrade earns its keep. We've gone from that fluctuating 30 to 50 range straight to, at least for a good majority, a proper 60 FPS target. And the difference is immediate. It just feels smoother. Movement, combos, dodges, big ability chains, everything has that extra snap to it. It makes the whole game just feel more responsive and, way more fun to play. Is it perfect? Not quite. I did see the occasional tiny wobble down to 58 every so often, but in moments it does go as low as 50 with big visual effects or, all-out attacks. Now again, does it make much of a difference? I don't think so, honestly. But I'd say the vast majority of my testing, it was cruising pretty comfortably at 60 FPS, but there's still drops, basically. But overall, I'd say it's mostly stable, but it's definitely pretty clean with that performance, and honestly, I think it still transforms the experience. Now let's talk about the other bits, because there's a change first of all worth knowing about whether you're on Switch 1 or Switch 2. So that is, this update adds a brand new mission rating, that is S+. It's a small thing, but for anyone who likes returning to old stages and, squeezing out every last point, it's a nice extra target to chase. And alongside the patch then, Bandai Namco also dropped a new paid character pack. Completely optional, of course, but it's there if that's your thing. I also think the big quality of life win here for Switch 2 owners is going to be load times, because, wow, are they long on Switch 1? And I am talking like long. I've put the two versions here side by side on screen so you can get a feel for it, and we'll actually keep talking while the Switch 1 crawls through this. And Switch 2 isn't what I'd call fast, honestly. In fact, they're still on the chunky side. But compared to Switch 1, it's a massive improvement. You're not waiting around nearly as long. And in a mission-heavy game like this, it really starts to, add up. So final verdict while the load screen still goes. This is a really solid upgrade. It's not a full overhaul, not a complete transformation, but a genuinely meaningful step up for a game that was always pushing the Switch 1 a little too hard. Visually, the Switch 2 version just looks better across the board. Sharper image, clearer textures, fuller environments, more enemies on screen, cleaner effects. It finally feels like the game isn't just being squeezed to fit. Pop-in then is reduced, cutscenes look much nicer, and everything has a bit more life to it, even if some of the old rough edges are, still very much here. Performance though, that's the real win, going from that fluctuating 30 to 50 FPS range straight to what is a pretty decent 60 for a good majority with the occasional drop still. I think overall, if I put them side by side, it's still on the Switch 2 feels smoother, more responsive, and honestly, more fun. Again, even with still occasionally drops down to near 50, it is, a huge improvement. The extra options then, like S Plus ranking, a nice little bonus, and while load times are still far from instant, they are so much quicker on Switch 2 that it genuinely just improves the flow of the experience. This all said, it's not perfect either. The aliasing, the odd glitch, the baked-in limitations of what is a 2020 Warriors game. This is just a repetitive genre by concept. It's not for everyone. I get that. This will not change your mind. But look, if you already own it, grab the free upgrade. No question about it. If you've never played it, but you do want to jump in, this is now easily the best way to experience it on a Nintendo console, but I wouldn't pay full price just because they put it on sale all the time. Now, it may be delayed slightly when we see that next sale because of this upgrade. It's going to get new eyeballs on it, but I'd still, absolutely wait. This one's normally down to like 10 quid, $10, your regional equivalent, basically. But yeah, look, all right. Anyway, if you enjoyed this breakdown today, do me a favor, hit subscribe. And yeah, I'll see you on the next one. Cheers all.